The desert was a furnace, a place where the earth cracked like old leather and the wind scoured bones clean in a single season. Out here, silence was not peace, but a sentence waiting to be carried out. The first figure to break that silence rode alone, his horse staggering under the weight of distance. The man in the saddle looked carved from the same sun-baked stone as the mesas looming in the distance. Dust streaked his coat, sweat matted his hair, and a jagged scar ran from temple to jaw like a reminder the desert had already tried to kill him once and failed. He leaned forward in the saddle, eyes fixed on the shimmering horizon, as if he had been chasing it his whole life. By dusk, he reached the wooden skeleton of a town called Dustwater. Its sign swung weakly on rusted hinges, groaning whenever the hot wind pressed against it. The streets were near empty, save for a pair of dogs fighting over a carcass and an old woman sweeping a porch, her eyes darting away when the rider appeared. Windows shuttered. The air thickened with suspicion. In towns like this, a stranger was never just a stranger. He was a portent. The saloon offered the only glow in that barren twilight, its door yawning open, spilling music and laughter into the dust. When the man pushed through the swinging doors, the piano stuttered to a stop. The drinkers turned, their faces roughened by sun and years of sand-bitten hardship. No one welcomed him. The barkeep, a narrow fellow with sweat stains on his vest, looked as if he'd rather pour poison than whiskey for the newcomer. The man rested both palms on the bar and ordered. His voice was quiet but carried an edge, the kind that made lesser men obey before thinking twice. A glass was filled. The whiskey caught the lamplight, amber and cruel. He drank slow, watching the room through the mirror behind the bottles. A card game resumed, though the player's shoulders stayed tight. The piano creaked back into life, softer, less sure. In the far corner sat Sheriff Harlan, a man whose badge had lost its shine, but not its weight. His gray beard tangled at the chin, his eyes weary but sharp, like the last embers of fire refusing to die. He watched the stranger without moving, recognizing in him something familiar, violence carried like a second skin. The room's hush broke when a table of men rose. They weren't gamblers or ranch hands. Their coats bore dust not from labor, but from long rides. They moved with the assurance of wolves, 3 of them closing in on the bar. One spat at the stranger's boots and muttered a name, Cortez. The word carried to the saloon like a curse. The stranger didn't look at them, only set down his glass. The biggest of the 3 shoved his shoulder. Silence stretched, thick enough to choke on. Then steel-cleared leather, the sound sharp and final. 3 shots cracked in quick succession, echoing off the walls like thunder trapped in a coffin. When the smoke lifted, the 3 men lay scattered across the floor, their blood spreading dark across the sawdust. The stranger holstered his revolver with a calmness that unsettled everyone left alive in the room. The barkeep gagged. The piano man froze mid-note, and a woman near the stairs clutched her shawl tighter, trembling. Sheriff Harlan rose slowly, his chair scraping loud on the floorboards. He stepped forward, boots heavy, hand near his own weapon though he didn't draw. His voice was grave but steady. "This ain't your fight, stranger. Dustwater's barely holding together as it is. You put blood in our sand. Cortez will know by sundown, and when he rides, we'll all pay for your bullets." The stranger met his gaze at last, eyes unreadable, cold but not empty. No reply came, only the faint grind of teeth, a jaw working against something unsaid. He turned back to his whiskey, the firelight behind the bar painting his scar red, like an open wound. Whispers filled the saloon. People spoke of Rodrigo Cortez, desert warlord, butcher of caravans, the man who commanded Los Lobos, a pack of mercenaries as wild and merciless as the land itself. His reach stretched across valleys and rivers, his name heavier than law. Dustwater had been left alone so far, but not out of mercy. Towns like this were cattle waiting for the brand. Sheriff Harlan's eyes stayed on the stranger, measuring him. He'd seen killers before, but there was something in this man's silence that unsettled him. Not cruelty, not rage, something heavier. A hunger that wasn't for gold or whiskey, but for something colder. Outside, the desert night pressed close, and the stars burned like holes in black cloth. The stranger stepped from the saloon after finishing his drink. The street was barren again, lanterns flickering weakly against the dark. His boots ground in the sand as he walked toward the livery. At the far edge of town, shadows moved. Horses stamped. A dozen riders waited where the dust rose pale against the moon. Their leader's silhouette was unmistakable, even in a half-light. Wide-brimmed hat, shoulders broad, the air around him carrying weight like a storm before lightning. Cortez's men had already arrived, drawn by whispers quicker than wind. From behind him came the sheriff's voice, low but certain. "You've stirred the devil out of his hole. Dust water won't survive what comes next." The stranger didn't turn. He adjusted his revolver at his hip and looked out at the waiting riders. His silence was answer enough. The desert wind swept through the street, carrying the scent of dust, sweat, and blood. Somewhere a dog barked once, then fell quiet. The town seemed to hold its breath, caught between two worlds, the one it had clung to in fear, and the one now riding toward it with fire in its teeth. The stranger took one step closer to the darkness beyond the lamplight, and the night seemed to lean forward, hungry to see what came of him. Dawn came harsh, striking the desert with white fire, and with it rode the sound of hooves. Dust water had not yet shaken the night's unease when the first riders appeared, silhouettes against the rising sun. They came slow, deliberate, like predators approaching a penned herd. Women herded children indoors, shutters closed, and men fetched rifles that shook in their hands. The stranger stood on the saloon porch, arms crossed, watching. Sheriff Harlan joined him, face drawn with lines of worry deeper than the desert gullies. "They'll test us first," the sheriff muttered, spitting into the sand. "See if dust water still has a spine." The test came swift. A knot of riders thundered into the street, laughing like jackals. They fired into the air, shattered windows, set a wagon ablaze. Smoke curled black against the bright sky, and fear tightened its grip on every house and soul. The stranger did not move until one of the raiders dragged a young man from the doorway of the general store and pressed a revolver to his head. Then, with a movement sharp as the crack of a whip, the stranger stepped into the street. The standoff lasted only seconds, but each second stretched like rope. The gang jeered, the youth begged. The sheriff's hand twitched near his pistol. Then came the report of a single gunshot, loud and absolute. The outlaw holding the boy dropped in the dust, a hole neat and final between his eyes. The stranger's revolver smoked faintly in his hand. Silence gripped Dustwater. The riders snarled, circling, but they did not rush. They had seen precision in that shot, and precision unnerved them more than blood. Their leader snarled an order in Spanish, and the raiders wheeled their horses, retreating down the street, spitting threats as they went. Behind them, laughter drifted on the wind, but it was a hollow sound, like wolves marking prey. Sheriff Harlan turned on the stranger, anger burning beneath his weariness. "You think you bought these folks safety? You've just signed their death warrants." Cortez doesn't let a town spit in his eye. The stranger holstered his gun, expression unchanged. If the words struck him, they left no trace. He walked away, boots crunching over shards of broken glass, leaving the sheriff to simmer in frustration. By midday, Dustwater gathered in the square. The people looked not at the sheriff, but at the stranger, fear and desperate hope mixing in their eyes. They wanted strength, someone who could stand against the storm coming for them. The stranger gave them neither comfort nor command. He sat in the shade, cigarette glowing between his lips. As if their lives weighed less than the smoke he drew into his lungs. Cortez appeared by sundown. His entrance was no rush of hoofbeats, no reckless charge. He came slow, deliberate, a dozen riders flanking him. Rodrigo Cortez was not a brute carved for muscle, but a man shaped by hunger and fire. His dark eyes burned beneath the brim of his wide hat, and when he smiled, it was the smile of a knife catching light. He dismounted with the ease of a king stepping into his own court. Sheriff Harlan faced him, badge glinting faintly though his hands trembled. "This is law's ground, Cortez. You've no claim here." Cortez's laughter rolled like distant thunder. "Law!" he said, gesturing to the sky, to the sand, to the broken homes. "Law is what a man can hold in his fist. I hold the desert. I hold fear. And I will hold Dustwater." His eyes slid to the stranger. Unless, of course, I have already found a brother in arms among you." The crowd murmured. Cortez stepped closer to the stranger, his boots leaving prints sharp in the dust. He looked the man over as one appraises a blade, testing edge and weight. "Your shot was clean. Your silence truer still. Ride with me. Los Lobos have need of a wolf." The stranger's gaze lifted, steady, unreadable. For a moment the air stilled, as though the desert itself waited for his reply. But he gave none, only flicked a cigarette into the sand, the ember dying in the grit. Cortez's grin widened, as though silence pleased him more than words. Not all silence in Dustwater carried honor. Elias Finch, the sheriff's deputy, had been restless since dawn. He was young, his beard patchy, his eyes quick with envy. Gold shone brighter to him than loyalty, and fear louder than justice. That night, beneath a desert moon swollen and pale, Finch met with Cortez's riders beyond the edge of town. His whisper carried on the wind, names, weak points, promises. In exchange, Cortez promised him survival and more, power carved from Dustwater's ruin. Finch walked back into town with sand clinging to his boots, his smile hidden in the dark. By morning, Cortez made good on his vow to remind Dustwater of its place. His men dragged townsfolk into the square, rope and iron binding wrists. Mothers wept, children clung to skirts, and the sheriff stood powerless as Cortez mounted a wagon to address them all. His words were calm, almost tender, but each syllable carried a blade. Every town pays the desert its due, some with coin, some with blood. Today, Dustwater pays with both. A nod, and two of the bound men were dragged forward. Shots cracked, echoing across the barren land, leaving nothing but echoes and screams. The bodies collapsed into dust, blood soaking into ground already stained by too many before. Sheriff Harlan surged forward, fury breaking through grief. "You bastard!" he shouted, striking one of Cortez's men before being clubbed to the ground. Blood ran down his brow, dripping into the sand. Cortez crouched beside him, voice low enough only Harlan and the stranger could hear. "Your people live because I allow it. Pray the man with the scar chooses his place wisely. For if he stands with you, Dustwater will burn. If he stands with me, perhaps it only bleeds." The stranger watched from the edge of the square, his face carved from stone. His silence had become a weight pressing on every chest, each man and woman desperate for him to speak, to act, to choose. But he gave them nothing, only those eyes that seemed fixed not on Cortez, not on Harlan, but on something far beyond, as if measuring distances no one else could see. When Cortez rode out, leaving blood and terror behind, the square was silent but for the sobs of the broken. The sheriff, bruised but unbowed, pushed himself to his feet. He staggered to the stranger, voice hoarse, but fierce with the last fire he had left. "You came here carrying ghosts. Maybe you don't give a damn if Dustwater lives or dies. But hear me. Cortez is the devil walking, and I'll put a bullet in him or die trying. If you're half the man your gun says you are, then you'll stand with me." The stranger's jaw shifted, a muscle twitching beneath the scar. He didn't answer, not with words, but his hand lingered near his revolver, as though memory and promise weighed against his silence. Sheriff Harlan stared into those hollow eyes, and for the first time he felt not just fear, but the faintest edge of hope. The desert wind rose, rattling loose boards, carrying away the smoke and sorrow, but not the scent of blood. Cortez had shown Dustwater what law meant in his world. Now the town waited for the scarred man to decide whose world it would become. Night settled over Dustwater like a shroud, the silence broken only by the restless shuffle of horses and the faint clang of a blacksmith's hammer, striking in defiance against despair. Sheriff Harlan sat in his office with a bottle half empty, blood dried on his temple, his eyes hollow yet burning with the stubborn fire of a man not yet ready to surrender. Across from him, the stranger leaned in shadow, the lamplight flickering against the scar that carved his face into something half man, half myth. "You've seen him before," Harlan said at last, voice scraping low. "That smile of his, like he's already buried you. You've met Cortez, haven't you?" The stranger did not answer quickly. He drew on the silence, letting it stretch until the sheriff began to think he would not speak at all. Then, with a voice dry as desert stone, he admitted, "I rode with him once." The words landed heavy, thick as gunpowder. Harlan straightened, searching the stranger's face for a crack of weakness. None showed. "He left me in the sand with vultures for company," the stranger added, eyes gone distant, seeing not dust-water but some far-off killing ground. "Took my blood, my brother's, everything worth a damn. I lived, but only because death was busy elsewhere." The sheriff leaned forward, his weariness tangled with sudden understanding. "So this isn't about Dustwater at all. You're here for him." The stranger's jaw clenched. "Every man needs a reason to keep breathing. He's mine." From that night on, the uneasy alliance was forged. The sheriff and the stranger became two sides of the same coin. One man clinging to law that had no teeth left, the other to vengeance sharp enough to carve through bone. Together they began to cut at Cortez's edges, striking where his grip was weakest. The first blow came beneath the moon, where a caravan of Los Lobos riders hauled stolen rifles across the desert flats. The stranger moved like a wraith, his pistol whispering thunder, each shot measured, each body dropping without wasted motion. Harlan covered his flank, his old hand steady, the badge gleaming faintly even in the chaos. When it was over, the sand drank the blood of half a dozen wolves, and the rifles lay burning in a pyre that turned the night sky crimson. Word of the ambush spread, and with it grew Cortez's rage. From his camp, he sent riders to scour the land, torching ranches, crucifying men suspected of betrayal, branding women with the mark of Los Lobos. His cruelty was theater, every act staged so that even whispers of his name would bleed fear into those who heard. Elias Finch, his betrayal now complete, donned the black hat Cortez gifted him. He rode through Dustwater with swagger, barking orders to men he had once called neighbors. His pistol swung low, daring anyone to question him. Yet behind the bravado lived a gnawing desperation. For Finch knew Cortez trusted no man. The deputy had traded his soul for a scrap of power, and even in his sleep he dreamed of Cortez's knife at his throat. Meanwhile, the stranger and Harlan struck again, tearing at supply lines, freeing prisoners meant for execution. Each skirmish painted the desert with fresh scars of fire and smoke. And each time, the stranger walked away without triumph in his eyes, only the hard way of a man dragging himself closer to a grave he welcomed. Harlan began to see it, the stranger's hunger for death as much as for vengeance. "Killing him won't heal you," the sheriff said one night as they cleaned blood from their guns beside a dying fire. The stranger stared at the flames, expressionless. "Healing isn't the aim." It was after the third raid that Cortez struck back with fury untempered. At dawn, his riders swept through the settlement of Red Hollow, not far from Dustwater. They left no walls standing, no voices alive to tell of it, only smoldering ruins and carrion crows feasting in the ash. Dustwater awoke to the smell of smoke carried on the wind, and the message was clear. The war had begun. The stranger walked to the charred remains of Red Hollow, boots sinking in the ashes of lives. He touched a broken rifle, its barrel twisted by fire, and for a moment his scars seemed to throb with memory. Harlan watched him, seeing in the man not just rage but grief that cut deeper than any wound. "You lost kin to him, didn't you?" the sheriff asked softly. The stranger's silence was his only reply, but the truth was written in the way his hand lingered on the ruin as though it were a grave. That night, the stranger set Cortez's supply camp ablaze. He did it alone, moving through shadows like a phantom. Oil spilled, torches caught, and soon the desert horizon burned red as the earth itself bled fire. Cortez's men screamed as flames swallowed canvas, rifles, and horses, the chaos reaching the warlord himself. Cortez stood at the heart of the inferno, face lit by firelight, rage etched deep. He knew then that the man who haunted his edges was no nameless drifter. It was a ghost he had once left in the sand. By the time the stranger returned to Dustwater, his coat stank of smoke, his eyes hollow and unblinking. Harlan met him at the edge of town, a mixture of awe and dread in his gaze. "You've lit the devil's heart, and he'll come for us now. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now!" The stranger brushed past him, voice low but certain. "Then Dustwater best be ready to meet hell." As the wind carried sparks across the night sky, the town braced for what they knew was coming. Not a raid, not a threat, but the full weight of Cortez's fury descending on their broken streets. And in the silence that followed, every soul in Dustwater looked toward the scarred man, wondering if he would stand for them, or only for the vengeance that kept him breathing. The morning broke with sky the color of steel, a silence so absolute that even the birds seemed to know it was coming. Dustwater's people stood in the streets with rifles clutched in trembling hands, eyes wide and hollow from sleepless nights. Sheriff Harlan walked among them, his voice gravel but steady, telling them to hold, to aim straight, to remember that courage was sometimes only the act of standing when fear begged you to fall. The stranger leaned against the saloon's porch post, head bowed as if listening for something beneath the earth. His scar caught the weak light. His revolvers hung ready, and the whole town looked to him more than to their sheriff, though none would admit it. The thunder of hooves came before noon, rolling across the desert like storm clouds with no rain to give. Dust plumed on the horizon, and within it rode Cortez and Los Lobos, a tide of leather, steel, and hatred. They filled the canyon road and spilled onto the flats, dozens strong, faces painted, rifles gleaming. Cortez rode at their head, calm and assured, as though the town were already ash beneath his heel. His black horse snorted, mane whipping in the wind, and he raised his hand to still his men. Silence fell, broken only by the creak of Dustwater's boards underfoot. Sheriff Harlan stepped into the street, badge pinned crooked but shining stubborn in the light. His voice rang, cracked but unafraid. Dustwater, don't kneel. You want it, you bleed for it. Cortez smiled, white teeth against sun-dark skin, a predator amused. His gaze swept the people, then fixed on the scarred stranger. So the ghost walks, he said. I should have left less of you for the vultures. The stranger's eyes lifted at last. His voice was quiet but sharp enough to carry. This ends today. The first shot came from the rooftops, a rifle cracking, dropping one of Cortez's riders from his saddle. Then the street erupted. Bullets screamed, glass shattered, the smell of gunpowder thickened until it was choking. Horses reared. Flames leapt where lantern oil was flung, and Dustwater became a crucible. Harlan fought like a man possessed, his old revolver bucking in his hand, every shot taken with grim precision. The townsfolk, untrained but desperate, stood their ground, turning alleys into kill zones, using fire and broken wagons as barricades. But Cortez's wolves were relentless, pouring into the streets, cutting down any who faltered. Through it all, the stranger moved with the terrible grace of a man born to violence. His pistols flashed, his boots carried him through smoke and blood, his presence both shield and blade. He fought not for glory, not for Dustwater even, but for the promise carved into his scar, a reckoning long owed. Elias Finch revealed himself in the chaos, turning his gun on his own townsfolk. With a sneer of triumph, he shouted that Dustwater belonged to Cortez now, that survival meant kneeling. Yet in his eyes flickered not conviction but terror, for betrayal had made him fragile, and fragile things broke quickly. Harlan saw him and charged, rage burning brighter than the pain of the bullet that tore his side. They collided in the dust, fists and curses flying. Finch pulled his revolver, but Harlan wrenched it aside, the shot going wide. With the last of his strength, the sheriff drove his knife into Finch's gut. The deputy gasped, eyes wide, and fell like the coward he had become, the black hat rolling into the dirt. Harlan staggered, blood soaking his shirt, and collapsed to his knees. The stranger knelt beside him, their eyes meeting through the smoke, and didn't finish it. Harlan rasped, the life leaving him but his will unbroken. Don't let that devil ride away again. Then he was gone, slumping into the stranger's arms, his badge catching the last flash of sun before slipping into shadow. The final reckoning came in the center of Dustwater. Cortez strode through fire and ruin, his revolver gleaming, his coat dark with the dust and blood of battle. The stranger stepped to meet him, the crowd falling silent even in their terror. Two men, bound by betrayal, their history etched into the desert itself, faced each other at last. No words wasted, no ceremony. The air held its breath. Then steel sang. Their duel was brutal, not clean or noble but raw, savage, close enough for fists and boots when bullets ran dry. Cortez struck like a hammer, strength and fury behind every blow. The stranger answered with precision, his scar burning red in the firelight, his silence heavier than any curse. They crashed through the wreckage of wagons, into the dust, trading blows and blood until both dripped with it. At the last, Cortez raised his pistol, teeth bared in triumph. But a single distraction, Finch's black hat rolling past on the wind, a reminder of betrayal even among wolves, made his hand falter. It was enough. The stranger's revolver barked once, final, a single thunderclap that split the air. Cortez staggered, disbelief painted across his face, blood blooming crimson down his chest. He fell into the sand, the desert taking him at last, his empire crumbling with his breath. The battle ended as suddenly as it had begun. Los Lobos, leaderless and broken, scattered into the wilderness, their howls fading into the distance. Dustwater's people stood in the ruins of their town, some weeping, some silent, none untouched by the slaughter. Fires still smoldered, corpses lay heavy in the dirt, and the air was thick with smoke and mourning. The stranger stood over Cortez's body, revolver loose at his side, chest heaving but eyes empty. Sheriff Harlan's body was carried past him, wrapped in a blanket, the badge resting atop it. The stranger bent to retrieve it, turning the metal over in his hand, the weight of it more grave than gold. He set it gently on Harlan's chest, a gesture wordless yet final, and the townsfolk bowed their heads. When dawn came, the stranger was already saddling his horse. Dustwater had survived, but survival felt like a hollow victory. He looked once more at the broken town, at the faces that stared at him with gratitude and grief, and then he swung into the saddle. No one stopped him, for all understood he was not a man who stayed. He rode west, into a sky painted blood red by sunrise, his silhouette shrinking against the horizon. Buzzards circled overhead, the desert reclaiming its silence. Behind him, Dustwater would rebuild, scarred but unbowed. Ahead, only the endless sand awaited and the ghosts he carried with him. The wind rose, carrying his trail into nothingness, as though he had never been. And yet the desert remembered, as it always did. The blood it had drunk, the names it refused to keep.